the idea here today is to really have it be kind of a group discussion, more so than a classic book talk, although Steve has written a book. So I'm joined by Steve Brill and Nicole Gill, and we're also honored to be joined by some of our members of the National Council on Social Media. And maybe someone Willa could put a link to the council in the chat. And because there are people on this call today who also know a lot about this issue of disinformation and tech reform, he's co-founder of NewsGuard, founder of Court TV, of the American Lawyer magazine, of Brill's Content, Journalism Online, and of the Yale Journalism Initiative. He's also the author of 4 books, including this one right here, won multiple national magazine awards. Oh, you guys can't hear me.
You broke up for a second, but
can you hear me now?
But to my mind, it was the good part where you were describing me. So.
You and your book. I might have to move in the office. We'll see. Here's Steve's book. It's fantastic. Y'all should buy it. But he's also done a lot with his life. Big media entrepreneur, multiple national magazine awards. Nicole Gill is the co-founder and executive director of Accountable Tech, where she leads organizational development and strategy to tackle digital threats to democracy. Before founding Accountable Tech, she led national campaigns on marriage equality, tax reform, and protecting the Affordable Care Act. So Nicole also is kind of one of our panelists today, but again, we hope a lot of people will be speaking up. So let me just kick it off by saying that as we all know, truth is under multiple assaults today. Some of those are.
We lost you again.
Tech. Social media companies, search companies, programmatic advertising companies have created an information ecosystem in which disinformation often thrives more than facts. Saturday's assassination attempt on President Trump was the most recent case in point, and as NewsGuard reported, in the wake of the assassination attempt, quote, the worst of social media emerged in the aftermath of the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, as diametrically conflicting conspiracy theories about the origins of the attack spread more quickly than reliable information did. So Steve, let me just start it off with you. And I know it's a big question, but maybe you can answer it in a couple of minutes, which is, how did we get here? What is the the last 20 years of media history that got us here?
Well, I trace 4 forces that sort of came together in kind of a perfect storm during that period. One of them is the rise of social media platforms, and with the social media platforms, their discovery that their best business model was to have recommendation algorithms that point people toward the most inflammatory content and not in any way the most reliable or calm content. The second force, which despite the expertise of so many people on this call, many might not understand, is the other great technology breakthrough, which is programmatic advertising, which has created the economic system by which having inflammatory content, having hoax content is financed by some of the most celebrated advertisers and ad agencies in the world. Hundreds of them unknowingly finance the stuff that we see on social media platforms and the websites with which they have an association. The other 2 forces are the rise of demagogues, conspiracy theorists, hoaxsters who were able to really gain strength and momentum through social media that they could never have gained in any other way. And the last force are the people who are susceptible to those conspiracy theories, the demagoguery, the hoaxes, because the system in this country has stopped working for them. And you could point to J.D. Vance's book as a pretty good documentary of how that system stopped working. You know, whether you believe in his current solutions for that is probably a different story. So if you put all those forces together, you have a polarized world where nobody starts any debate with the same set of agreed upon facts. So everything becomes a matter of opinion. Who got the most votes in the last election? That's a matter of opinion. Will the COVID vaccine kill you? That's a matter of opinion. What happened to Donald Trump on Saturday evening? To many people, that's a matter of opinion. And if we can't really agree or start our debates over things with the same set of facts, we end up where we are today, which is the kind of polarization and distrust in all expertise, distrust in what I call in the book the referees that any society counts on. And referees are people whose good faith we depend on, whether they're doctors or other experts, whether they're poll workers, whether they're judges, whether they're scientists, even whether they're meteorologists who tell us whether the earth is getting warmer or not getting warmer. If we can't depend on and rely on the good faith of the experts most of the time, or referees most of the time, then we are nowhere. And that's really where we are today.
Yeah.
It starts with, we often think that it starts with Section 230, which is true. And, I traced the history of Section 230 as, an innocent effort in 1996 to solve a 1996 problem that wasn't that much of a problem, but that has morphed into a situation where the term accountable tech is actually a contradiction in terms, because the tech industry, the social media platforms it's the only industry on the planet that is not in any way accountable or responsible for any of the damage it may do.
That's right. Nicole, why did you start Accountable Tech? I mean, what were you seeing that made you feel like you had to, do something significant in starting an organization just to address these problems?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me, Steve. Really enjoyed the book. Looking forward to talking more about it. Accountable Tech started in 2020 when we were, facing what was thought to be one of the most, if not the most consequential election of our lifetimes, which seems like a throwaway statement at this point, given current political events. And at that point, we had been through Cambridge Analytica. We knew some of what was happening behind the scenes with tech companies that was contributing to polarization and to this idea that Steve discusses, which is kind of the rabbit holes of truth. And everyone can find their own individual rabbit hole of truth on the internet, should they wish to. And our organization is intended to hold those companies accountable. We believe that the tech companies themselves, especially the social media companies, should be held accountable for their actions. Like Nick just mentioned, Steve just mentioned, there's virtually nothing that can be done to kind of rein in what the damage that these companies have inflicted on society. Part of that is Section 230, but also, and I hope we'll get into this, the business model of these firms relies on a lot of a lack of transparency, which makes it really hard for the rest of us to understand what's happening and to know how to fight back. And it also relies on something called a dual class shareholder structure that makes it hard for shareholders and independent advocates to have a say and to push back. And so we believe in advocacy that inspires regulation, both from government and from regulatory agencies, but also that there need to be changes within the companies themselves that would better hold them to account.
Steve, I want you to kind of just hammer the point of why you started NewsGuard too, because your big insight was that if people were to pick up on the ratings that NewsGuard does, and you should describe to people the way you do ratings, that it'll actually change the way that eyeballs and ad dollars flow around the internet. It'll actually change the flow of water, so to speak, around the internet in a way that certain places that are engaged in journalism will get more water, and those who are not engaged in journalism will get less. So just I want you to describe both kind of what you all do at NewsGuard and the potential tectonic effect it could have if you're successful.
So the theory we had, this was 2018, and we thought in 2018, with the revelations of what had happened in the 2016 elections, with some of the whistleblowers starting to come forward with information about the recommendation algorithms, with the signs being really clear that there was a lot of misinformation out there that we knew about. We all knew about the Russian efforts to disrupt the American election, for example. So we thought in 2018 that we were really in the middle of a storm, and we didn't know anything, because if you cut to today, 2018 is before COVID, it's before the COVID vaccine, it's before Stop the Steal, it's before the 2020 election, it's before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's before the Hamas, Israel war, it's before everything that we now see. We didn't understand that this was actually the calm before the storm, but our rationale was pretty obvious to us. We thought we were geniuses. We had the best business plan in the world, which is we didn't believe in government regulation of content. We didn't think that could happen, content per se. We thought that if people were simply given more information about who was feeding them the news, they would react accordingly. So in our view, if people could see a NewsGuard rating, a point score of 0 to 100, whenever they were looking at a Facebook feed that referred to some website, or a Twitter feed or a YouTube feed, and then they could hover over that point score and read a nutrition label that explained exactly who was behind this information. Was it a really highly credentialed ethical news organization, or was it the KGB? Was it a real doctor giving you information about a vaccine, or was it someone who was trying to sell you fruit pits as a cure for cancer? We thought that was a slam dunk, and we thought that with Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, facing all kinds of public pressure for a fraction of what they were spending on PR firms and lobbyists and lawyers to deal with that, if they spent less than that to license our ratings, it would solve their problems. Because we also had done a survey with Gallup, for example, that said that if people saw a low-rated score, they were less likely to share that news online. And if they saw something that was highly rated, they were more likely to share it. That all sounds perfectly logical. The piece we didn't understand, and we grew to understand as we tried to talk to Facebook and Google and Twitter, and as more of the whistleblowers came forward, was that the last thing they wanted was someone who was going to say that's an unreliable piece of news and therefore encourage people not to share it. Their business model was exactly the opposite. They wanted that stuff to be shared, because the more that stuff was shared, the more eyeballs they'd get and the more advertising revenue they'd get. The only major tech company that listened to us and quickly responded to us was Microsoft, who was sort of the adults in the room and didn't have the same kind of business model. So Microsoft makes the NewsGuard ratings available to anyone with their Edge browser. They use us to decide on advertising, which is the other piece of this. But we didn't understand that we thought we were trying to solve a bug in the Facebook system, that what we were actually doing was attacking a feature of the Facebook business model. So, luckily we have found lots of other uses for our data in the ad industry, in the defense industry, with content moderators of platforms like Microsoft and others. So we've carved out a very good business. And now with generative AI, where we think we have the training tools and the guardrails to help them avoid the obvious problems they have, we think we have an even better business. But the context that we're talking about is there is no way that Facebook or YouTube, as currently constituted, let alone apps, are ever going to want to use something like NewsGuard, even though what NewsGuard does is nothing more and nothing less than give people apolitical information. We're strictly apolitical. We rate conservative sites very highly if they deserve it, and many do. We rate liberal sites negatively if they deserve it, and many do, and vice versa. But the last thing that those platforms want is something like us.
Yeah, I've often equated.
Change them. The only way to change them, I may be jumping ahead a little bit, but the only way to change them is not to waste time, asking Congress to reform Section 230, because Congress can't even name a post office. There are ways to change them that I described. For example, the Federal Trade Commission, I think could force them to change their business model right now. I hope we can get into that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to get into that, and I really actually want to have a debate about 230, Steve, if you're willing, because you do mention it in your book as a potential solution, and you mentioned kind of two different versions of 230 reform. I want to go to Nicole, but before I do, I can tell you that we at Issue One, we do more than 400 meetings on the Hill each year, and a large number of them are about this. And I can tell you that the old story on the Hill, that it's a bunch of crotchety members of Congress and they don't even know how to work their cell phones, let alone do they understand tech. That's like the 2-year-old story. A lot has changed, and Nicole, you can probably fortify this in the last 2 years. I mean, there was a House Energy and Commerce subcommittee hearing on tech a month ago. It was specifically about 230 reform. 32 members of the subcommittee showed up, roughly half Republicans, half Democrats, and not a single one said that 230 was fine. And they actually did.
So how's that? That's true, but how's that working out so far?
We are seeing, Steve, a lot of momentum around both tech reform, and the Kids Online Safety Act is a great example of that, where there are now 70 co-sponsors in the Senate, which makes it one of only 10 bills in the last 12 years beyond appropriations to reach 70 co-sponsors in the Senate. And then we're seeing lots of energy around the 230 conversation at this point. So Nicole, and then Steve, you can come back in. What are you all seeing in terms of kind of the appetite, the bipartisan appetite for tech reform, and what solutions are you all leaning into?
Yeah, tech reform, especially protecting kids online, is the last bipartisan issue left, it seems, on the Hill. And Nick, you just mentioned the Kids Online Safety Act. 70 co-sponsors is pretty incredible. I think you're right too when it comes to Section 230. Everybody in the community is pretty open to discussing changes. The hearing you were just referencing was about a 18-month sunset provision. The idea that would force legislators to really come up with something in the meantime. I think what we have to remember, and Steve talks about this in the book, is that the legislation and the regulatory model is one half of it. The other half is the business model. And the business model is really fueled by the ad industry and outrage. And I also, something that we've advocated for at Accountable Tech, and that Steve talks about eloquently in the book, is the ad industry and surveillance advertising. This idea of personal advertising, that's what the tech company wants you to call it. But we have let these companies track us incessantly and then follow us around the internet and serve us personalized, targeted, surveillance-based ads that fuel their entire bottom line. And that really makes up the bulk of what the big social media companies earn. And that industry is still being propped up, right? We know that most likely about half of every dollar that's spent on online advertising just goes away to middlemen, and we're not quite sure who they are or where they are. And yet we're all kind of, well, not all of us here, but the industry is complicit in holding up that business model. And what it does is prop up these companies and allow them to continue to thrive and dominate. And so I think as we talk about Section 230, which we agree certainly needs some serious taking a look at and reform, I think we're also always going to have this kind of prominent, this issue with these firms if they are the dominant drivers of our economy, and they're left to make their money in the way that they so choose, which often puts us, the users, at the bottom of their needs.
So let me add a plug for Nick's other organization, because if issue one, which Nick has been a trailblazer with, which is all about campaign finance reform and overall just regulating the moneyed interest in Washington and in state capitals around the country, that's the root of everything, as issue one always says. That's why it's called issue one. And here you see it in stark relief. I mean, if you just think about the children's online safety bill, I mean, who could possibly be against that, right? I mean, how do you have a press conference and say, I think we should leave kids on their own when they're online, and stop interfering with Facebook or X, and causing them unnecessary expense to protect children? No one's going to say that, but somehow even that hasn't emerged. Now it may emerge, and it may prove to be the exception, because it's about children and safety, the exception that proves the rule. I mean, if I could maybe wave a magic wand in Washington, I would ban all congressional hearings about the tech platforms for at least 5 years. And instead of wasting time on hearings, I would actually do legislation, because it has to make you, Nicole, and people on this call just even more frustrated than I am, to watch Mark Zuckerberg show up every 6 months and apologize and say, we're trying really, really hard. We know we have to do better. We know we have more work to do. And by the way, did I tell you I'm really, really sorry? And we have to try really, really hard. And we know we have more work to do, and nothing's more important. And then 6 months later, he comes in and says, I'm really, really sorry. I got so frustrated about it that I overruled my editors and put 3 pages of the book where I just did a line of Mark Zuckerberg apologizing over the space of 4 years, saying exactly the same thing, with one exception, where his apology came the day before Yom Kippur, and he linked his apology to atoning on Yom Kippur. But other than that, the apologies were all the same. There was that little flourish of creativity that day. I mean, that's everything you need to know. They go and they apologize. Now imagine if someone who was regulated, let's take a theater, let's take an event venue, where there's a sign up on the wall that says capacity is limited to more than 500 people, to 500 people. More than 500 people is dangerous and unlawful. And imagine if the person at that venue said, I'm sorry that 3,000 people died in a fire here, but 3,000 people really wanted to come. And if they want to come, we let them in. Well, that's the excuse at the end of the day that the social media platforms use, which is we can't possibly guard against all this harmful stuff because so many people want to post. When 10,000 people a minute want to post on YouTube, what are we supposed to do? Well, in any other industry, the answer is, well, if you can't do that in a safe way, then you need to not let 10,000 people post. But they get away with it. And the reason they get away with it is Section 230. But I think Section 230 is wrong now because the recommendation algorithms make those platforms editors, just the way the editor of a magazine is an editor. And the premise of Section 230 was you shouldn't be held responsible because you're not responsible for the content on your platform any more than the post office is responsible for the content of a letter that that the mailman delivers to someone. Well, we know that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and Steve, I of course take your point about the power of the tech lobbyists in Washington, but I will say that to win in Washington, and in their case, winning means making sure that nothing happens, right? You need a couple things. Number one, you need some kind of a moral high ground, or at least the illusion of a moral high ground. You need to seem like you're kind of an ethical industry or an ethical company. Number two, you need a product that people believe in, and therefore they believe that if government touches it, it'll ruin the amazing product. And then number three, you need the lobbying and campaign finance might to try to stiff arm the members of Congress. At this point, the tech companies are left only with the final one, which is the lobbying and campaign finance money. They've lost the moral high ground in this country. And thanks to Jonathan Haidt, who's a member of our council, and others, they have also lost the love of the product. A lot of people now see social media as being, a toxic, negative force in their lives. So I do think that that's helping, but we, of course, as well as Nicole does, because we do so many meetings on the Hill a week on this stuff, understand the challenges ahead. Nicole, in terms of 230 reform, do you think that we can have accountable tech without changing Section 230? And let me just, because I know that almost everyone on this call probably knows what 230 is, and Steve just stated what it is, but just let me remind you, it was in the 1996 Telecom Act, and what it basically said was that the interactive computer services, which meant something back then that it has now been radically expanded, shouldn't be held accountable for what other people post or users post on their sites. And
well, actually,
that is
a little more complicated. It says that, but the purpose, remember, it was called the Good Samaritan Act.
Yep.
So when Mark Zuckerberg was 11, he was crowned a Good Samaritan by Congress. And the reason it was called the Good Samaritan Act was what the members of Congress were afraid of, and probably rightly so, was that the platforms, if they tried to govern what was posted on their platform, they'd get sued for their editorial decisions. Now, if that sounds like the law that's floating around Texas right now, that's because it is. But that's the Good Samaritan Act. So it was well-intentioned. It was meant to allow good guys to police their content. And just think of the boomerang effect of that.
Yeah, that's Section 230C2, I think, Steve, is the one that says they're publishers. But back to the Sections 230C1, Nicole, of this kind of immunity, can you imagine having an accountable tech industry without changing Section 230C1?
It's hard to answer. I don't know if we have the right answer to that yet. I think there have been some proposals like, some folks on the far progressive side, especially in the civil rights community, are really concerned about eliminating, doing away with Section 230 because it provides content moderation that can limit the harms, right, of civil rights abuses and other nefarious content. And then going, kind of a middle ground approach, removing the liability protection for the largest players might have the outcome of allowing the smaller platforms to continue to spread dangerous, toxic misinformation, while the larger ones are those who are getting sued out of their minds and not able to compete, or the opposite, sorry, screwing that up. Ultimately, I mean, this is just unheard of in the American economy. We have an entire industry that is completely unregulated and is in and about every American household. We don't do this with anything else that we put into our homes, that we, incorporate into our lives. And the same way that products are tested for safety before they're put on the road, or, I've got 2 young children, their car seats, I read those safety reports. Like, it's just unheard of that we have extended liability protection like this to this industry. And frankly, what I think is most egregious and probably part of the root of the problem is that we've let the onus be on us, the users, the advocates, the journalists, to prove what is wrong and to prove the harm, to show the harms, instead of ensuring that these companies actually have to prove to us that they're safe, that they're following existing laws. And it's just an odd situation that we've found ourselves in, and that 25, 30 years, down the road of Silicon Valley development, we're so committed to. But if you stop and think about it, it's not normal. It's not the way we think about other businesses and industries in this country. And that is a really good place to start.
Well, I think I disagree a
Yeah.
little bit with the prospects of how to change this. But yes, I think that Section 230 should be changed. And again, I would the way I would change it, and this has been proposed in Congress, is that if you have a recommendation algorithm, then you lose that protection because you are an editor as well as a publisher. But there are 60, 70 people on this call right now. There could be 60 or 70 complaints filed this morning with the FTC. And what do I mean by that? Well, right now, if you go to Facebook, you will see that Facebook has a terms of service, the way every platform does. And in those terms of service, Facebook says, we will not tolerate harmful misinformation, state-sponsored disinformation, hate speech, violence. It's basically the list of all the things we know that they do tolerate. And again, they will say, well, we don't tolerate it, but there's just so much we can do about it because the volume is so high. But if they say they don't tolerate it, they don't say, well, we don't like this, but so many people log on all the time and are posting stuff. There's really nothing we can do about all that stuff, so you're on your own. That's not what the terms of service say. The terms of service say we won't tolerate it. That is the fact that it is tolerated, it is allowed, because they don't do anything to either govern their capacity or hire more people to screen it, because that would cut into their profit margins. It's not like Elon Musk's other companies, car company, could say, well, we like airbags and we like safety belts, seat belts, and we're working on the software that'll keep our cars from driving over a cliff. But so many people want to buy our cars that for the next year we're going to cut out the seat belts and the airbags because it slows down production and cuts into our profit margins. They're not allowed to do that but with his other company, he is allowed to do that. But that right now is a violation of their terms of service. And the FTC has sued Facebook successfully for violating the privacy promises that are in their terms of service, the exact same terms of service. They've collected billions of dollars. So the FTC today could require them to comply with their terms of service or get sued. Now, they could change their terms of service. They could post very prominently. The FTC could require them to post their terms of service with regard to content very prominently. And they could check a box that says, well, actually, we do tolerate harmful misinformation, or we do tolerate state-sponsored disinformation, or we do tolerate violence. Then they wouldn't be violating their terms of service. But imagine how they would be hurting themselves from the standpoint of getting advertising or getting users. So the terms of service is the linchpin right now where they could be sued today, either by a state attorney general, a class action lawyer, or the FTC. And it stuns me. I mean, this solution, when I first looked at it several months ago, I thought, well, I know I went to law school, but I must be missing something here. And I consulted every lawyer I could find who really understands, FTC law, First Amendment law, and all the rest. And I kept saying, why isn't this a lawsuit? And no one could give me an answer. The closest I came was someone who said, well, the terms of service might be a little bit, squishy in terms of whether this is actually a promise. Well, the FTC could fix that with a regulation saying you must be specific with your promises. That they could do. There's no First Amendment issue with that. We're not saying you must have this kind of content versus that kind of content. It's just you must level with your consumers about what kind of content you're going to have. That's content neutral. It doesn't violate the First Amendment. And you could do it, again, you guys on this call could do it this morning by filing your own complaint with the FTC. It's right there on their website where you can file a complaint.
Under an unfair and deceptive practice, right, Steve?
Yeah, exactly. That's the authority.
Yes.
Yep. No, I think that's a really creative solution, Steve, and you do lay it out really compellingly in the book. And we are, going to be talking about it at issue 1. Nicole, we'd be happy to, have a joint conversation with you about that. I do want to. It's 11:40, so I would love to open this up to questions and discussion. Steve outlines a bunch of other ideas in his book for solutions, including ending online anonymity, and including campaign finance laws to expose pink slime, fake news websites, and a bunch of other stuff, which we can get to. But I'd love to hear other ideas from those on the call. I see Dick Gebhardt is on. Dick is, everyone knows Dick Gebhardt, but what you might not know is that he is a board member of Issue 1's, and he's also the co-chair of our Council for Responsible Social Media, which now has 60 plus members from almost all sectors of society: religious leaders, civic leaders, Nobel Prize winners, tech whistleblowers, former heads of the CIA, DOD, NSA, and Dick is moving this group forward with a collective voice to take on a lot of these issues. So, Dick, do you have anything to add?
Thanks so much, Nick. And I'd say the following. As soon as I heard about Stephen's book, I bought it and I've read it, and I love it. And there's no other book that I've seen that really bells the cat like you do. So thank you for doing this. I also have a special reason to want to do something about Section 230. I voted for it in 1995 or whenever it was, because we bought their arguments that we would never have a tech industry if we didn't do this. And they also argued they were just a dumb pipe, which of course they're the most intelligent pipe in human history. So all of that's fallen away. And I agree with Nick Penniman and the others in our group that think we've got to work hard to not only pass COSA, but do something about Section 230. And I'm kind of optimistic. As Nick Penniman said a minute ago, if you would look at the knowledge of members of Congress on a bipartisan basis about this problem 2 years ago and where it is today, it's remarkable. They finally get it. And I'm pretty optimistic that we can get a lot of this stuff done. I love your FTC recommendation. And I didn't think of that or know about that. And we should really pursue that at issue 1. And I'm sure we will. So thank you for all you're doing. Your recommendations are spot on and give us a lot to work with in the days ahead.
Thanks. I really appreciate that, especially coming from you.
Jim Nathan, I wonder if you'd be willing to ask your question. You got it in the chat. If you'd just be willing to turn on your camera and ask it of the folks here instead of them reading it.
Yes, hi, Nick. Thank you very much. I will. Basically, I love the energy, the leadership, and seeing so many organizations, especially like the ones that are highlighted here today, of issue 1 and Steve's organization and the Accountable Tech. But how do I feel like every day we fall further behind because we are so diverse with wonderful, talented people, like all these different boards that Dick Gephardt said, this unification. And if you really looked at a moderate population and you looked at a more progressive population, we are the vast majority of our nation. And yet I feel like we're being held up by an unbelievably well-organized, financed, structured, messaged group through the Heritage Foundation and so many others. And I don't even understand fully why the oligarchs that made most of their money off of the government in the first place and have so many benefits. I don't understand exactly their motivation in this other than power and continuing their profits. But ultimately, this has to come to roost. And how do we bring all these great groups together to make some difference?
Jim, that almost sounds like a too good of a tee up for us, but I'm just going to plug it one more time. This Council for Responsible Social Media that Willa pasted into the chat is something we started at issue 1 2 years ago based on your insight, based on the insight that there are almost too many voices that are too fragmented. There's too much of a cacophony around this from the reform side, and that we needed to bring major stakeholders together around a single bipartisan table to move forward collectively with a common legislative vision and common messaging. And so you'll see on the council, we have the head of the ADL, but we also have someone from the Southern Baptist Convention. We've got lifelong Republicans and lifelong Democrats. We've got tech whistleblowers, and we also have national security experts and civic leaders. We've got journalists, et cetera, et cetera. We've got former media executives. So the idea is like we're trying to gather all the key stakeholders who have something who would benefit both from a democracy perspective, but also even from an industry perspective, if we are able to rein in social media and change the information environment. And with Dick Gephardt's leadership, that group has been extremely productive. So we're working on it. We're not the only effort, but we're working on it.
And I just add my 2 cents, if I could, that one of the most important things you're doing is making sure this is not, that it is bipartisan. In fact, it's nonpartisan. One of the things that stunned me that I spent a fair amount of time in the book writing about is how things that no one would have ever dreamed would be a matter of politics became political. I mean, who thought a measles vaccine was political? To the extent it was, 5 or 10 years ago, it was, I guess, sort of on the left, not on the right. I mean, we see this at NewsGuard. We get accused of being bribed by the right wing because, we give some conservative sites higher ratings than liberal sites. We get accused incessantly by Republicans now in Congress of being, pro-left. But this stuff is not political. It is not a matter of politics whether, Hank Aaron died from a COVID vaccine. He didn't. It is not a matter of politics whether, the Hamas attack was a false flag, done by the Israelis. This is an issue that goes way beyond politics. It's an issue where these tech companies have been allowed, for the purpose of making money, to force people, as Nicole said, down various rabbit holes, not even choosing to go down rabbit holes. One of the guys I profile in the book is a guy in Columbus, Ohio, who became unemployed as a result of COVID. He'd gone to Ohio State, grew up in a middle-class suburb, had never had a speeding ticket, is home with nothing to do. Yes, he had voted for Trump, but he wasn't a radical or an activist, but he had a lot of spare time on his hands. He's home, and he goes down the rabbit hole and ends up on January 6th in the Capitol. He'd never been to Washington. Ends up on January 6th, wielding a coat rack as a weapon and wearing a bulletproof vest. How did that happen? How did that get to be political?
That's right. Deb, and then Vince.
Hi. First of all, thank you for putting this together, and thank you, Stephen, for your book. I love the idea of 230 having that change about the algorithm. If you're gonna, as soon as you use an algorithm, it should not be considered content. It's design. But I also wanted to mention that I have a foundation. I lost my daughter to a social media harm. I have a foundation, and we do research, and we're actually suing a couple of platforms right now for exactly the reason you discussed earlier, because they are not following their guidelines, their stated guidelines. And so I think it's if others could be joining in on that bandwagon, I think that would be great. We had researchers set up fake accounts, find drug dealers and online and report them. And the social media companies, over 90% of the time, did not take those accounts down. They either didn't respond at all, or they responded that this doesn't go against our community guidelines, which it does. So that's the basis of our lawsuit. And yeah, I just wanted to encourage others to do the same as well. And another thing I would encourage folks to do is, if you're into advocacy, which I know a lot of people here are, we're trying to get Kathy McMorris Rogers, in the chair of the ENC committee, which is Energy and Commerce Committee in the House, to let COSA move forward and get marked up. COSA being Kids Online Safety Act. Right now, it's a little bit stuck because they're trying to get another bill passed as well. The more people who can call Kathy McMorris Rogers and say, we need to see that go forward, the better. We need to get it done in the next few weeks. So thank you for any help you can give with that. Thanks.
Deb, are you plugged into either our group or to Nicole's group?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, I'm very involved with Fair Play, and have met Nicole before, and I work very closely with Kristen Bride.
Great. Yeah, she's
an incredible advocate. Actually, we live pretty close together, but she's always in DC, which is great. I think part of what you're talking about, Deb, too, gets back to the question of incentives. And what we need to do is change the incentives that these companies have to work for, because unless there is anything other than profit that employees that the companies are incentivized to work towards, they're never going to prioritize it. It's never going to come up on their radar. I personally think there are lots of product developers and engineers and UX designers and folks at these companies that don't want, Snapchat to be a place where folks are being cyberbullied or, sold drugs that then lead to death. But they're not necessarily incentivized to fix that problem because it is all about their bottom line. And so, there are some bills that do address that. COSA does to some extent. There's also some state legislation, the Age Appropriate Design Code, that's been passed in California and Maryland that instead of kind of moderating and regulating at the downstream effects, doing kind of content moderation, it instead regulates the incentives and requires platforms to be privacy, to have the highest privacy standards for children and to design their products to be safer for kids. And I think that's another good model that we should be looking at.
Vince, I want to get to you, and Willa, maybe if you want to give a quick insider update on where we think we are with Kathy McWorks, Rogers, and others, that'd be handy. Vince.
Hi, I'm Vince. I am involved in politics, but I've also been in IT for over 25 years. I'm a systems administrator. So, like everybody said, I see this as the major issue. And, I feel strongly about, we need to do something about it. And it drives me nuts every time I hear people on both sides say, how does the other side believe this? And it's like, it is social media. It is social media. Anyway, I have a lot to say, but a couple of ideas. I searched out issue 1. I used NewsGuard before, but really to find out like what we're talking about now. What are the solutions? So when I see my congressman and my senator, what I bring up social media every time with Congressman Courtney Murphy, the Attorney General William Tong, but what can be done? I think, a grassroots kind of thing with people like me when they see their congressmen, because they're not hard to find now that, campaign season's winding up, to bring this up. And I think your organizations are great in doing what they're doing, but I think there's some power in people that are not in an organization, regular people like me saying something to them.
Absolutely, Vince. And we, we're developing more of a kind of grassroots footprint on this stuff. As you can see, we've gone very grass tops so far, which is kind of organizational leaders and, folks who used to be at high levels in government. But we're definitely starting to reach out to the grassroots. Our best grassroots advocates so far have been people like Deb and Kristen Bride, people who sadly, tragically lost their kids because of the negligence of these companies. Incredibly powerful voices. But you, Vince, being a tech person, would be fantastic too, and we'd love to keep you plugged in. If you want to direct message Willa or something during this, that would be great. But I hear you. We are almost up. Jamie or Willa, do you guys want to give an update on where you think we are on the House side when it comes to COSA really quickly before we go back to Steve and Nicole for final comments?
Jamie, do you want to take this one first and I can add on?
Jamie, by the way, is
Yeah.
our legislative manager for our tech and democracy work.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. My internet's being a little wonky, so I apologize if there's any lagging. We are in, I think, a decent place with COSA in Congress. We've gotten strong support from the Senate side, 70 plus co-sponsors in the support of Leader Schumer. I'm optimistic that he will still bring it to the floor. We're anticipating a Dear Colleague letter coming out this Sunday that If it has coasts in it, that would be a very good sign. If it doesn't, we'll have to go back to the drawing board and apply some more pressure there. On the House side, unfortunately, the bill has been sort of tied together with a different privacy bill called APRA, which has a lot of opposition to it. We here at issue 1 have been supportive of the idea of comprehensive privacy protections, but that bill just has too much opposition at this point to move forward. And so what we've been trying to say to leadership and to committee leadership on the House side is, you got to decouple these things. You've got to let kids' safety move forward now. You got to give it its time. And I think especially if the Senate moves, they will be in a position where they have to. If the Senate doesn't, we have to find new and creative ways to keep up the pressure on both.
Yep, that's right.
I know we have a lot of COSA folks on the call, so if anybody has anything else they want to add in, feel free.
Okay. All right, so Steve and Nicole, I mean, again, for those looking for solutions, we've got lots. Steve has 23 pages of them in his book. God bless you, Steve. I can't stand books where it's 190 pages of the problem and 2 pages of the solution. Steve spends a lot of time on the solutions and it's very frequently. So Steve, any last thoughts? And then Nicole?
Well, just to come back to the work you're doing, part of the solutions, yes, I talk about getting rid of anonymity online, which is a double-edged sword. There are a lot of costs that we would incur if people could not, people around the world could not go online without their names being attached. But on balance, I think that's really important right now because just the Russians have created such an online presence without anybody knowing about it. That's just one example. But a bunch of the reforms I talk about are in the political realm. The two being ballot initiatives, which are already happening in this country. One would be to get rid of the two-party primary system and go to either ranked choice voting or a joint primary system where the top 2 finishers end up running against each other, which would force candidates to appeal to the middle instead of appealing to the most Republican or the most Democratic voters on each side of the aisle. The second is ballot initiatives to get rid of gerrymandering. To my mind, gerrymandering is the equivalent in politics of the social media platforms' recommendation algorithms, because gerrymandering herds people, into their own, corners. And then the only thing you have to worry about if you're a candidate is, if I'm in a Republican, gerrymandered district, I'm going to run in a primary and try to be the most extreme person appealing to my base. So I think that the way I begin the book is by talking about polarization and the fact that we all need to start thinking about uniting around the same set of basic facts. And the way I end the book is by explaining, both in terms of technology reforms, technology-related reforms, and political reforms, how we can do that. In no instance do I advocate that the government should get involved in any way in content control and controlling content, but should be content neutral. One of the other things I mentioned is one way to deal with programmatic advertising is to have a simple SEC requirement requiring publicly listed companies to file for public consumption a list of all the websites where they spend more than X dollars a year advertising. If that had been in effect a couple of years ago, Warren Buffett might have become aware of the fact that he was the biggest single financial supporter other than Vladimir Putin for Sputnik News, because Geico, the insurance company that Berkshire Hathaway owns, is the largest single programmatic advertiser on Russian propaganda. Again, it's not like Warren Buffett's waking up every morning saying, how can I send more money to Vladimir Putin? It's the nature and the opaque nature, arguably the fraudulent nature of programmatic advertising. But if CEOs had to see where their ads are going, they would feel responsible about it or be held responsible for it.
That's right. Nicole, any last quick thoughts?
Very quickly, I know we're over time, but I don't think that we're lost. I don't think this is over. I think that people do have power here, and that we have an opportunity to change the way that tech functions in our system. And that I encourage people to be vocal about it, to talk to their friends and family, to reach out to their elected officials, to think about the ways that tech affects them, and to share that. And Accountable Tech is one of the organizations you can go to look for possible solutions or ways to get involved, or there are lots of others. And thank you, Issue One, for hosting this forum and all of your great work, really.
Thank you for
Yeah,
your
thank you,
partnership,
Nick.
Nicole. Thank you, Steve. And no, all is not lost. In fact, I think we are probably very similar to where the beginning of the regulation of the tobacco industry was. I think we're at the beginning of something significant. So thank you all for your time. Stay tuned with our organizations. Buy Steve's book, and we're in it for the long haul with you. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.